Um, I'm delighted to welcome Rehab Rubin, Elman Family Visiting Professor of Jewish and Israeli Studies at UST, and Kelly Chai, Division Head and Chair Professor of Social Sciences. Now I will ask Professor Chai to introduce Professor Rubin.
Welcome. Is this on? Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Uh, I'd like to thank the library for hosting this wonderful event. I've heard from students in Professor Rubin's class that he's a very dynamic, knowledgeable, and prolific scholar. Let me introduce him as this semester, we're absolutely delighted that he is in residence with us in the Division of Social Science as our second Elman Family Visiting Professor of Jewish and Israeli Studies from Hebrew University. We're very delighted that his wife, Professor Milka Rubin, is with him this semester as well. And Professor Rubin is a professor of geography at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was trained in archaeology as well as geography and historical geography from Hebrew University, and also completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Maryland. Professor Rubin is a very distinguished scholar who has published 5 books, including one prize-winning one, and over 70 articles in peer-reviewed journals on the historical geography of Israel, Palestine in late antiquity, the history of cartography and Hebrew maps of the Holy Land, and geographical aspects of pilgrimage and holy places. Professor Rubin's research has been supported by several prestigious grants from the Israel Science Foundation, as well as the Israel Ministry of Science, Physical, and Human Factors. And I understand that I've spoken to some of his students who have told me that, until they entered his classroom, they just view the world from a completely different light now. And so we're just absolutely honored to have you here, and we're looking forward to your talk. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Professor Chai. And thank you all for coming. I'm indebted to Mr. Richard Ellman for his kind donation of this professorship and for the really special opportunity to spend the whole term here in UST. For me and for my wife, it's a one in a lifetime opportunity to see something which is so much different from everything that we know from the other side, the other end of Asia. Most studies in the field of history of cartography have a local aspect. Some study a specific map maker, some study a specific printing house, and some deal with defined localities such as Venetian map makers of the 16th century or the map makers from the Netherlands, especially in the 17th and 18th. Other discuss maps of places, like maps of Africa or maps of China. I worked for many years studying the maps of Jerusalem and the Holy Land, so allow me today, please, to invite you to the other side of Asia, to the city of Jerusalem, the city holy for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and also my hometown. As a general methodological approach, this presentation follows the widespread notion that maps, as many scholars, but I think the compact definition is by Catherine Delano Smith and Roger Kane in the book, that map represents features, places, people, and phenomena, real or imagined, in their relative or actual spatial location. Accordingly, a significant portion of all maps, not exclusively those of Jerusalem, are graphic conceptualizations of a subjective message rather than a scientific objective and accurate depiction of places and space, as many regards maps in the modern sense. Going back to Jerusalem, a city revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Jerusalem has been depicted on so many maps, probably earlier and more frequently than any other city that we can think of. In 1881, the remains of the 6th century church mosaic floor were discovered in Madaba in Jordan. Madaba is about 21 kilometers southwest of Amman. Its decorative stones form a map that of the Holy Land from the Nile Delta in the south. This is in all this thank you. In all these series of slides, this is the scientific copy, which used the scholars that studied the map, and these are photographs that I took myself when visiting Madaba in Amman. So you will see the two different views of the same style. So the map depicted the Holy Land from the Nile Valley in the south to the Galilee in the north. Its eastern edge depicted the towns of Transjordan and the Dead Sea, and the Jordan itself, and and the western side, the Mediterranean coast, was not preserved, but the cities along it, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, appear on the mosaic. At the center of the map, the earliest known cartographic representation of Jerusalem. Assuming an oval shape, the city is surrounded by a wall. Oh, sorry. The city is surrounded by a wall with gates here and here and here, and towers, two long streets running north-south. This street and this street, and both roads follow out the plaza adjacent to the northern gate, and both were excavated in archaeological excavation. The western one is very well restored, and the eastern one was excavated some years later, so it is not yet restored. The western colonnade led to what portrayed the largest building in Jerusalem, of course, the Church of Holy Sepulchre. Here on the map and here in a sketch that restored the relationship between the street and the church itself. And the next major sites along the map, you can see many other churches. The church which was built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, called the New Church of St. Mary, or in Greek of that period, Vinea. The church on Mount Zion, and other churches that were in the city, and you can see that the image, all the churches have this red tiles roof, which is typical to this map. To the best of our knowledge, no not one map of Jerusalem was produced between the Muslim conquest in 638 and the Crusaders' arrival in 1099. However, the city occasionally surfaces in the period's world's map. This type of maps are known as the TO or Orbis Terrarum maps, and it's a subgenre of the world maps typical to medieval times, presenting the world as a circle with a T of water bodies in it. This is the Mediterranean, and this is the Nile, and this is the Don and the Black Sea, and here Asia and Europe and Africa. You can see the pyramids here, and Troy of all places, and Babylon, I think, over there. And Jerusalem is here, but often in this type of maps, Jerusalem will be here in the center as the center of the world. The idea that Jerusalem is the center of the world is following the Christian interpretation of the book of Ezekiel, saying, "This is Jerusalem, I have set her in the center of all nations." With the Crusaders' triumph in 1099, Jerusalem became a focal point in the Christian world. Probably I should say became once more a focal point in the Christian world. As a result, it became a favorite topic for cartographers. The principal group of Crusaders' map includes approximately 15 maps, very similar to each other, all set in the city faces the east. The outer wall is described as a circle. You can see the wall and the gates, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gates to the city and the main streets. Now, if we will take a look at them one by one, we will see that on the north is the gate of St. Stephanos. On the northeast, we will find Jehoshaphat Gate. on the east is the Golden Gate, or as we call it in Hebrew and in Arabic, the Gate of Mercy. Zion Gate on the south, and David's Gate, today Jaffa Gate, on the west. We can see on the map the Church of Holy Sepulchre, the Dome of the Rock, which was built by the Muslims, but now is called by the Crusaders the Templum Domini, the Temple of the Lord, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is now Templum Solomonis. And among other places we can see on the maps more Christian places, some other churches, the market, the way to Bethlehem, and the way over there to Gethsemane and Mount of Olives. And I think last is the Mount of Joy, the mountain from which the Crusaders saw Jerusalem for the first time. So they called it the, in Latin, Mons Gaudi, or in French, Mont Joie, which is the Mount of Joy, because they were in their joy when they saw Jerusalem for the first time. In some of these maps, we can see even the Mount Lebanon, the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, and the Dead Sea, and some other features which are beyond Jerusalem. And all these maps, a whole group that actually, because of the uniformity of the map, we think that they had a common source, or they copied, or at least redrawn from one common source. And we can see the resemblance, or at least the graphic relationship between the world map and the maps of Jerusalem, with the same idea of a T, or kind of a cross in the center of a circle. Actually, besides this very well-defined group of circular maps, we have two other maps from the Crusader period which are not circular. One of them I will ignore in this presentation because it is so schematic and it is not really interesting. But the other one, the map that is kept in a small town in France, in the town of Cambrai, is very interesting because it brings an entirely different concept. And you can see, well, at least I will try to show you that the map is more of an eyewitness, more of it is more the impression of someone who went to Jerusalem and saw Jerusalem in his own eyes. I guess many of you don't know the map of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is much, much more close to a square than to a circle. And we can see it. We can see the important, we can see some of the important buildings. We can see the place where there was a cross standing on the walls of Jerusalem, showing the place where the Crusaders conquered or breached the wall. And it shows the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It shows the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as an architectonic cross-section that anyone who was not there could hardly draw it in this way. And beyond that, although the map was drawn by someone from Western Europe and the text is in Latin, he used the Greek term anastasis to define the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and it means, together with other sites which belong to the Eastern Church, it means that he was influenced, or at least he had some information coming from the Orthodox or the Eastern churches in Jerusalem, although he himself was probably Catholic from Western Europe. After the Muslim conquest or reconquest of Jerusalem in 1187 by Saladin, and all the more following the fall of the Crusader kingdom in 1291, the flow of Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land slowed down and lessened. For this reason, we know for only two realistic maps, both of which turn up in manuscript, that were produced during the 14th and 15th century, which supply a realistic eyewitness account of Jerusalem. The first one was drawn by the Venetian cartography Pietro Visconti. Actually, Pietro Visconti drew 4 or 5 maps of Eastern Mediterranean, the Holy Land, the city of Acre, and the city of Jerusalem. And he did it as part of the book by Marino Sanudo, who tried to persuade Europe to go on a new crusade, which never happened. The map is oriented to the east, Mount of Olives at the back, the Temple Mount here, and the city is surrounded by a complete wall with the Church of Holy Sepulchre here. However, we know that Jerusalem was not surrounded by a wall at that time because the wall was destroyed or at least damaged in the 13th century by the Muslim governor of the area at that time. The second map was drawn probably by a German pilgrim around 1475 by Siebald Ritter, and is kept in the Bavarian Museum in Munich. And what is interesting here is that it was drawn almost surely by the pilgrim himself. It's a little naive. It is not a very well drawn artistically. And you can see that he was looking at the city. He was looking at the city from the east, and you can see that the wall is broken here, and probably here also. And we can see that he went as a pilgrim from the place that St. Stephanos was martyred, through the gate, through the Via Dolorosa, to the place where Jesus is under the cross and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, and at the same time, he's showing the Temple Mount with the two mosques decorated with crescents. So we have the expression of the enthusiastic Christian pilgrim showing the way of the cross and so on, but at the same time, I would say an honest eyewitness that showed the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa with the crescents on top and so on. Oh, I'm sorry. And you can see the high minarets that will be typical in the landscape of Jerusalem from this period and actually till today. Towards the end of the 15th century, with the printing press, we can see the first printed map of Jerusalem. Actually, it's not only a map of Jerusalem, it's a map of the Holy Land drawn after a long pilgrimage voyage of Bernhard von Breidenbach, a German dean of the Cathedral of Mainz. And he made this pilgrimage together with a whole group of people. They traveled with a professional artist, and he took sketches along the road, and you can see the whole area from the Nile to in Egypt to Damascus, and Jerusalem in the center, much larger than the proportion. And here we are looking at Jerusalem from the east with the blocked up Golden Gate, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Church of Holy Sepulchre. Now, and the citadel of Jerusalem around here. Now, there is a peculiar thing about this map. The whole map is drawn from the west to the east. Jerusalem is rotated 180 degrees that it will be presented from the east, from Mount of Olives, to the west. And the Church of Holy Sepulchre is rotated again because the facade of the Church of Holy Sepulchre is facing south. So if we will draw, if it would have been drawn realistically, we couldn't see the facade, so they rotated it once more. So it's quite peculiar from the viewpoint of orientation. The Jordan Valley and the mountains behind it are drawn at the back of Jerusalem, as if they were west of Jerusalem, but actually they are east of Jerusalem. And we will see what happened when people who didn't know this fact copied the map, because then the story is getting more interesting. Well, I should have. Now, with about 500 early printed maps of Jerusalem, I will try to say a few things on three aspects. The first aspect is reality and imaginary maps. Some of the maps really draw a real image of Jerusalem, like the map of the Franciscan Minoritz Francesco Quaresmius. And on the other hand, some maps depicted Jerusalem in an entirely imaginary way. Christian van Adrichom, who was a Dutch priest who worked in Cologne, in Germany, read quite seriously. He read the works of Josephus Flavius, and actually he read everything that he could have read about Jerusalem. But he interpreted it with no relation to real topography whatsoever. So he thought that if Josephus said that the city of Jerusalem is surrounded by 3 walls, then here is the first wall, and here is the second, and here is the third. Practically, we know that the city was never looked like this. He put so much into the map, more than 280 tiny images like this and this and that and that. Each and every one of them has a number and a small sketch, and they related to his book. And if you're going to the book, you can read the history of Jerusalem so detailed that with events that happened and also with events that never happened. All kinds of legendary things, especially the entrance of Jesus to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and his Passio, and the crucifixion, and the ascension. And each and every one of these sites are detailed on the map. So some of the maps are really realistic, and you can compare it to an 1980 air photographs. So you can see the image of the city before modern expansion, and you can see that the lines are really drawn fairly okay. And when you compare it to this, you can see there's no topographical or geographical relation. However, I must say that I like this map very much, because there are so many details that you can use it as a window of, or a reflection of the concepts, of the ideas of the people behind the maps. So it is not only to know what the city looked like, but what people in Europe who studied and wanted to understand the city thought about it. Now, a word about realistic maps. We can see other maps that describe the city and followed it, and you can see that many maps were copied. Just now, try to see the similarity between this and that, and again this and that, and try to see these huge mountains that actually never existed, but they were copied from the mountains in that map that I showed you before. So for a European person, when you say there are huge mountains behind the city, he's putting these alpine peaks. Yes, well, believe me, I'm living in Jerusalem Hills all my life, and we don't have anything like this. Perhaps here in Hong Kong you have some pointed peaks like this, but not in Jerusalem area. Another thing is to show when we discussed the realistic nature of the maps, you can see that although they were Europeans, although the map maker wanted to emphasize the cave of Nativity in Bethlehem and the monument of Christ's tomb in the Holy Sepulchre, yet they were impressed by the Muslim minarets, and they depicted them as well. So everything is balanced, so to speak. Some of the maps were really, really detailed. This map of Antonio de Angelis and other Franciscan minarets who worked in Jerusalem for 7 years has many details, and you can really walk in the streets of Jerusalem today using this map. And the map showed all the area between the Kidron Valley and the mountains of Jerusalem, and it went as far south as Bethlehem. And you can see this map of Braun and Hagenberg, which is in this book over there. And you can see that we call the map a realistic one. However, the wall in this area is drawn as a circular, although it was pretty square. Against the realistic maps, we can see some really imaginary ones like this one, and they used all kinds of titles, like the true image of the of Old Jerusalem, or Jerusalem in the time of the Lord, or antique Jerusalem in different languages, in Latin, in Dutch, in German, in Italian, whatever. They are using the same concept, reading the Bible, or reading the historical sources, and drawing kind of a graphic interpretation of the sources with no relation whatsoever to the, and Arichom, again, to the topography of the city. But the details, as I told you before, the details are wonderful. This is the Temple Mount with graphic and textual reference to every tiny detail that you can think on Temple Mount, from the Holy of the gate, the walls, the gates, the Holy of Holies, the altar, the high priest, the great altar, and whatever, including the scene when, according to the New Testament, Jesus disturbed the what do you call them, the bankers and the merchants on Temple Mount, and so on and so forth. And you can see the Jesus entrance to Jerusalem and riding on an ass, and his ascension, and many other details, the Golgotha, and so on. It is interesting to see how sometimes they even used the historical imaginary maps to say other things as well. Hartmann Schedel, in his Liber Chronicarum, used the destruction of the temple, I think he used, to show something interesting. This is the temple, the Jewish temple that was destroyed in 70 CE. But look, actually, it is the Muslim Dome of the Rock with the crescent. While at the same time, the Church of Holy Sepulchre is standing there, strong and alive. Sometimes artists took maps and reused them. The Eder, an Austrian artist, took the map that we saw before by Quaresmius, copied it, and gave a whole atmosphere, artistic atmosphere of a Christian church with Christ on the cross, and then the angels are flying over the city, and so on. Another aspect is the aspect of sources and derivatives. I admit that in my research I paid a lot of attention to this issue, and I will share it with you briefly. When I started to work, I saw more than 350 maps in a collection, and I asked myself, what methodology can I use in order to deal with so many maps at the same time? And I realized that some of them are very similar to each other. So I split them to families. And in each family, I try to identify which is the first and which is the copy. And then you don't have to deal with the copy, because you can deal only with the original one. No? So here you have 4 out of 5 Italian copies of a map that actually I didn't bring today, but is a map of a Dutch artist, and he was the source. And I wrote an article, and then a Dutch scholar wrote me an email. I think you are wrong. I think that there was another source of your source. So you can try identify source and copy relations, but you can never know if your original is the original or there was someone before. So just look how it goes here and here, and this is even more interesting, because this one is 2 meters wide and this one is 9 centimeters wide. But this one is the original, and these are different copies, and actually this one is a copy of this one, and it has several copies of copies later. So and we can go more and more with this. I show you already the mountains, so we can show more. Here there is another interesting thing. You can see the true citadel of Jerusalem, and you can see a European type citadel that was put by the artist. Why did he do that? He did it because he was copying someone else who did it before. And it is very clear that he took it from this point. So these are things that are done in the scientific, that it will not be that I'm just showing you nice maps. That these are things that are done in scientific analysis of so many, so beautiful maps when you want to understand them. Another thing is the maps by pilgrims, or made for pilgrims. The Franciscan fathers were in charge of Western pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Actually, they are still in charge of the pilgrimage from the viewpoint of Catholics. So we can see that Quaresmius drew a map as part of his very large book, and in his book he's giving many details of every place where pilgrims used to visit. And another one of his group was Paulus Milonis, a French Franciscan who did the same. And if we are trying to analyze the map, then we can see we can go in the footsteps of the pilgrims, from Mount of Olives to Gethsemane, from Gethsemane across the Kidron to the Old City, to the Via Dolorosa, to the Church of Holy Sepulchre, and in another day from Mount Zion to the Vale of Hinnom, and to the Siloam pool, and back to Gethsemane, and in another day to the birthplace of St. John, or to Bethlehem. So we can study the maps not only from the viewpoint of source and copies, but also from the contents and what can we learn about the activity of pilgrims, the consumers actually of, or the users of these maps. But in Jerusalem, the different religious sects are always quarreling with each other. So similar to the Catholic maps, there are the Greek Orthodox one. The Orthodox monks used to, apparently, in the 17th and 18th century, they drew large icons, usually on canvas and not on paper or wood, and they sold them to the pilgrims who came in hundreds around Easter time. The pilgrims rolled it and put it in their backpacks and took it back home. We know about, there is a Dutch scholar in Leiden who has a database of over 100 of these icons, and many of the icons have the kind of an icon map, I call it, with the Mediterranean below here, and the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan, and the Dead Sea, and of course the baptism in the center. Bethlehem here, and Mount Tabor in Nazareth here, and in the center, the city of Jerusalem, and in each center, the Church of Holy Sepulchre, depicted as a cross-section that you can see inside the site of the when Jesus was taken from the cross down to the stone of unction, to his tomb, and rising from the dead, and the Greek Orthodox patriarch and his group. And what there is in Jerusalem beside all this is only the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa, and all these tiny buildings which are identified by Greek inscriptions are the other many Greek Orthodox churches and monasteries. So the city, the holy city, is a holy city by the Greeks, for the Greeks, and no one but the Greeks. So this is and when I'm saying this, this is the holy city of the Catholics, by the Catholics, for the Catholics, and no one except the Catholics. So it's kind of a competition. It's not the one side is very kind to all of us, and another one is very strict. So we're in another day, in another lecture, I should probably talk about the modern mapping of Jerusalem. In the 19th century, everything is changed. Modernity is coming to Jerusalem. European powers are coming to Jerusalem. And in the course of the 19th century, from the first one in 1818 to this one in 1864, Jerusalem is measured, and this one is the first really accurate map of Jerusalem, measured and drawn by Captain Charles Wilson from the British Royal Engineering Corps at that time. Just to conclude before I will run out of time, over the course of this paper, I tried to survey the development of Jerusalem cartographic presentation. I presented only a few examples of the numerous maps from earliest known map in the 6th century to this one, through the long way of medieval and early printed maps to this one from the mid-19th century. During all their history, the maps of Jerusalem have integrated realistic geographical accounts with a conception of the city as a holy realm in which the scriptural events occurred. In other words, every map maker stresses that which is closer to his heart, to his ideological, religious, and cultural proclivities. Thank you.
Many thanks. Then we can start the Q&A. We'll get, well, 2 to 4 questions depending on complexity and length. Please.
Well, are there any reasons why the old maps of Jerusalem of 6th century oriented in a way that north is towards the left and east towards the, the upper directions?
Well, this 6th century map, Jerusalem is only part of the Holy Land, and it was a mosaic decorated pavement of a church. So everything that you can ask about the orientation has to do with understanding of the orientation of the church and the place of the mosaic pavement within the church as the main panel in the center of the church facing the altar. Okay?
Thank you for a really engaging talk. I'm really intrigued and would love to learn more. My question concerns the extent to which digital technologies are being used in your field for answering the types of questions that you ask in terms of verifying authenticity, dating, copying, those types of issues.
Last year, one of my students finished a MA thesis on the modern maps of Jerusalem. What she did, they are not accurate, but what she did was taking 6 or 7 of these maps, digitizing them, and identify the same place in many different, in 6, 7 different maps, and identify the same points on an accurate, modern, we call it orthophoto, and rectified air photograph, which can be measured, and she tried to calculate the accuracy of these, the relative accuracy of these maps by using a GIS system of that can measure the degree of error of each of these points and calculating the average error of the maps and so on. So with this work, we moved from the subjective way of saying this one is a little better, this one is less, and so on, to a point where we can say quite surely this one is 10% forward from this one, and this one is 25.3% better than the former one, and going back to proving that this one is a real 98.90% accurate, similarly to modern one. So we are using these things. Admittedly, I'm not doing all the calculations, but we have a whole group of GIS people, and we are using what we are going forward with some other works as well to what is called today HGIS, Historical Geographical Information System. So yes, we do.
Right, thank you. As we can see that we've seen so many detailed maps and so many impressive works. So I do wonder that what drives so many people to draw these so detailed works? Are they each maps are finished by one person, and it must take years to finish that. So what drives so many people to do that? I mean, even what drives you to study the Jerusalem maps?
Well, there are three questions in one. One is the easiest and the hardest is what brought me to work on this. Curiosity, interest. I started my way as an historical geographer working on the development of Jerusalem through the ages. This is the class that I'm almost finished to give here in UST. And there was a whole collection at the National Library of Israel. And I thought, wow, there's a bunch of source material that no others worked on it. So I started, and you know, if the water is deep, the moment you jump into it, you have to swim. You don't have any other choice. So I swam. Am I still swimming? this is one thing. The other question was regarding the motivation. It is the holy city, and religious people were studying the holy city and the holy land, even if they were far away, even if they have never chanced to visit it, even if it was beyond the sea and beyond the border. They still sat and read and wanted to understand. And many of them wanted to develop the map as an aid for studying, an aid for understanding, or an aid to help other people to understand better. The third question is about the process, and the process is long and complicated. In the course of work, we're naming the name of the map. This is Wilson's, this is Adricom, this is Quaresmius. Actually, each map, not that always we know all the details, but there is the one who collected the material, there is the one who drew the first sketch, there is the one who gave it an artistic design, and of course there is the one who took the sketch and put it on a copper plate. And when you see how people working on a copper plate in a mirror view the other way, and how they had to write in a mirror handwriting, and then there is the printer. And then there is the publisher who invested all the money in order to create this book. So when it was the British Empire or the Franciscan order, then you can understand. But when it was a German publisher in the late 15th century, Anton Koberger, who invested so much money in the Schedel Liber Chronicarum, and apparently, because we, lucky, have so many copies, apparently he lost his money, because apparently he didn't sell so many copies. That's why so many survived, and we are lucky to have them. I think you have a copy.
Yeah, one map of the world from that book is there.
Yes, it is a very complicated process, and sometimes the librarian at the Hebrew University who taught me about antique maps used to call this map the Koberger Nuremberg, and I called it Schedel, because he was the publisher and he was the author, and I think we don't know who was the artist who really drew the sketches. So yeah, it's a very good question.
Okay, then we have finished, and then
we also has
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
yes, the event is finished. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.